that. And I just want to look at my Zoom leader here. Are we recording?
I can begin recording.
Please begin recording now. Thank you. All right. It's impossible to see who's online, so we're just gonna take it from here. Those of you that are in person, welcome. Again, please eat the food. And I think we're going to get going. As far as the slides on the screen, here they come.
I want to make sure that we are getting them into the Zoom room.
All right, we're getting people into the Zoom room. So while we are sort of waiting for technology to be its perfect self, let's just really quickly, those of you in the room, would you raise your hand if you are an educator by day? Awesome. Would you raise your hand if you are a parent of or a guardian of a student in schools? Awesome. Would you raise your hand if you are a labor leader, a union person? Okay. Now raise your hand if you are an education funding hero. You all should raise your hand. You are here tonight. Thank you very much. All right. So what this event tonight is all about is really taking what we know about the state of funding in our schools, transmitting it out there, again, agreeing on a set of facts, talking about what's possible this coming legislative session, communicating the hope that we have for this legislative session to turn around the funding crisis that all of us in this room and on our Zoom webinar would agree with. What we're going to do at the very end, though, is really give you a deep dive into all the ways that you can actually be an education funding hero by taking action. We're going to talk about a number of strategies and tactics that might make some people uncomfortable. And that's good because that's the growth edge and that's where we learn. So again, those of you that are just joining us and on the webinar, I don't know if you've heard, but this event is a lot of information and I'm admitting it's not the best teaching. It's direct instruction, but you will get all of the resources if you registered and we have your email. And this is about communicating amongst ourselves what we need to do different. Lobbying has not worked. Our schools are facing a new form of crisis in funding, and lobbying is not the successful strategy that we need to be following. It is a component that is critical, but tonight we're going to end with what can we all do, and we are going to ask everybody here to make some commitments. What are you going to do? If it's lobbying, if you've never done that, that's great. Start there. And we're going to ask you to also be patient with us as we work through the technology. I think we're ready to go. Are we ready to go? Yeah. Yes. Is State Superintendent Chris Reykdal in the Zoom room? That's a question into, yes. Is he a panelist? I can't see the Zoom. Please do. Thank you. All right. We go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. By the way, Meesh Vecchio, Seattle Education Association president, is over here doing maybe the hardest job tonight. This talking stuff is easy, but we've got a number of guest speakers who it might not be easy for. So I trust that we all know this is a warm room. Everybody here wants this to go well. And if you are about to speak in a bit here, remember, take breaths and we will get through this together. All right. As soon as that next slide is on, just really quick, waiting for the slide. So this is me. We're going to move past that. My name is Julianna Dauble. I'm a teacher. I'm the Education Association president for Renton. Done a lot of this work and we're moving on. Thank you. We're moving on to the next slide. So we have three incredibly important humans here tonight. We have three students, and I'm actually going to call up Alexis to take over this next bit. So we've got three students, Alexis, and those empty squares are Miles and Sam. You'll see their faces in a few minutes here when they begin talking. I'm going to introduce Alexis first. She is a Renton High School student. She attends Lindbergh High School and has been working on a number of justice and advocacy projects. And this event is for the kids. So I'm going to hand this over to Alexis.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexis Tran, and I'm a current junior at Lindbergh High School. And I'm here today to share my perspective on the school funding crisis and how it seeps into the day-to-day of student life. Growing up, I've heard time and time again how important education was from my parents, teachers, neighbors, and just about everybody. But if this is truly the case, then more schools constantly being asked to do more with less. Funding for schools is being reduced everywhere, regardless of zip code. In virtually every district, teachers are overburdened with their large class sizes, and in many cases, the extra work they take on just to sustain themselves. Music, art, and athletic programs are being cut, making them increasingly less accessible to many students. And perhaps most troubling of all, students are falling behind, not just academically, but in their mental health as well. When funding is cut, the shortage of school counselors only worsens. Right now, my school has 4 counselors for over 1,200 students, which is already such a high counselor to student ratio. With more than $15 million being cut from my district's budget next year, I fear that this ratio will only worsen. Counselors are the people who guide us through our academic and post-secondary paths. They help us navigate mental health challenges and provide support to us anytime life gets tough. This one-on-one support is essential for student success, and without it, students are left without the resources they need to thrive. Also, let's not forget about the importance of funding for inclusive curricula and subject areas like ethnic studies. This type of content is crucial in helping students become culturally competent learners and future leaders. Yet, these are often the first programs to be cut or receive little to no funding at all in the budget. But ultimately, it's not just about losing programs and resources. It's about what these losses represent. These funding cuts send a message that our education just isn't worth the investment. For students like myself, this is incredibly disheartening. But this crisis we're in doesn't just impact students. When schools struggle, families bear the burden, communities lose stability, and the workforce of tomorrow becomes less and less prepared. If we don't take action, we're not failing just our youth, but we're failing society as a whole. That's why I'm happy to see you all here today, ready to take action and advocate for change that prioritizes education and that prioritizes students like myself. And now, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce Superintendent Chris Reykdal. As a former teacher, soccer coach, school board director, state legislator, and executive for our state's community college and technical college system, Superintendent Reykdal refuses to let the status quo define our future. His relentless advocacy for free college courses through the college to the high school program and his dedication to providing free school meals demonstrates his commitment to ensuring students like myself have the opportunity to thrive, no matter our circumstances. A champion for full funding, Superintendent Reykdal leads the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction through the lens of equity and transformation, since first elected in 2017. So let's give it up for Reykdal.
Thank you, Alexis. Good to see everybody. I'm just going to set a little bit of the stage here for this incredible night that you've got. As you heard Julianna say and Alexis, her testimony on what she needs, we kind of know the problem. I want to put an exclamation point on the fact that all of the narrative out there that this is a spending problem is a false narrative, and it's dangerous. It vilifies public educators, and I mean that term broadly, from custodial to classroom teachers to counselors, bus drivers, food service, and all of the above. What we have is a revenue problem. We look at this data nationally. We know that in any other state, on average, about 9.8%, almost 10% of their economy would go back into their state and local governments. And in this state, it's 0.5% below that. That's $4 billion a year, by the way, less money. When we zoom into schools, when we say, okay, how much of all that is going into schools? In this state, only 3.1% of total GDP. So about 35-40% of public budgets are going to schools. In the average state is 3.6%. And again, that's about $4 billion. If we were taxing Washingtonians the way we do everybody else, there would be about $4 billion more per year. We continue to say that is mostly borne by public ed because the gaps in those other functional areas, while important, aren't even close to the gaps in K-12. And so I think Julianna said this best as I've heard her around the state. I try to learn from lots of folks. It is not inconsistent to say to folks that we have a woefully funded education system and we overtax some people in this state. And quite frankly, and I hope there are media there, they need to lean into this question differently. They need to honestly tell the public that this is a reality, because they're asking our lowest income families and our middle income families to pay a larger share of the tax burden than any other state in the country. That is the functional problem of the revenue system. It's why there are false choices being portrayed in our state capital and others around the country that say we have the money that we have and we got to figure it out and the demands exceed the supply. That is a policy question. That is a moral question of what we will do first and foremost on the tax code. So it is about adequacy of revenue more, and then it's about fairness question, which is what do we do to look towards things that level the playing field? You saw capital gains come forward. You saw the voters approve it. They spoke loud and clear. It moved us from 50th in the nation in regressivity to 49th. But it is going to take a wealth tax. It is going to take a high income earners tax. It's going to take taxing profit instead of gross sales. These are the kinds of things that would actually make us a more equitable state on the tax side, generate revenue for schools, and then sustain. And what I mean by that is if the entire economy is moving into the hands of fewer and fewer people, the oligarchy, you're going to have to tax them. Otherwise, relying on sales tax and property tax is going to increasingly put a tax burden on a share of the economy that's smaller and smaller and smaller. Low-income families cannot keep spending and going into debt, credit card debt and consumer debt in order to spend to prop up this economy. So it's bigger than just education. We have a crisis of actually existing as a public sector, state and local government in the state without this choice. Last thing I'll say is wherever you go, please make sure that your narrative debunks the idea that this is about people getting paid too much money in our public schools. Here's what we know for sure. There's what's called a pay penalty for teachers in particular. We look at what they earn in a given state versus what they could earn with a similar baccalaureate degree. And we're a high-tech state. We're manufacturing. We've got a lot going on for us here. We're the third or fourth wealthiest state in the nation per capita because we have so much opportunity to earn in the private sector, which means our educators make 28% right now under the latest numbers, 28% less than their peers who have baccalaureate degrees in other sectors. So the BS narrative about, oh, we put a bunch of money in 8 years ago and it all went to the educators. Number one, that's where it's supposed to go. That's what we do. We either pay people to survive and thrive, or we hire more people to support students in our program. So that's exactly what it was supposed to do. And still we find ourselves behind. And that's just certificated teachers. Remember that if we're talking about custodial staff, bus drivers, paraeducators, food and nutrition employees, many of these folks are on the lower end of the wage scale per hour, and they typically only get 1,000 to 1,200 hours a year of contract work. And therefore, they are our most vulnerable adults and sometimes the most impactful in our schools. So we've got a revenue crisis. You're going to talk more about that. We need to lean into funding and not the false narrative of, we only got what we got, so cut everything else in order to lift up schools. That is a bogus message. If all you're going to do is lift our percentage of the budget in K-12 by cutting everything else, you failed nursing, you failed counseling, you failed mental health supports in communities and chemical dependency and housing issues. So our kids and families need all that. And again, let us never believe in the false narrative that educators are the reason for this. This is a tax code failure and a courage failure. So thanks for letting me set the stage.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Reykdal. We are proud to have endorsed you, and we are proud to have a champion in an executive office that understands our revenue crisis so well. So we're going to, again, move quickly here because we have a lot of speakers and a lot of information to share. The next actual speaker is our only person tonight not from Washington State. So this is a state crisis, and turns out the United States of America doesn't fund schools well in other states. I know that's shocking to you all. But what I'm asking our next guest speaker to relay to you is hope. The state of Massachusetts has a story. He's going to outline the story as best he can. He is an NEA leader and his name is Gekopi. And I think without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to him and let's see what he has to tell us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Juliana. Yeah, I would love to tell you a story about all the way back in go back all the way to 1920, but I'm not going to do that. What I will say is that the Massachusetts has what we call the fair share tax, or the millionaire's tax, that we implemented 2 years ago. And that was a decade-long fight. That took so much time and so much energy from our local partnerships, unions, and community building to really not just convince, but develop networks of people to really understand the language and the feeling of wealth inequality. And what Chris just said rings so true for Massachusetts. As well as we fund our schools, we're still fighting for funding. So there's a lot of hope that comes from our fight. But I also want to point out, like, this is just a constant battle that we are continuing to try to support. What I will say is that in Massachusetts, we do have a state tax. Everybody in the state gets taxed 5.5% across the board. And that used to be the flat rate for everybody, and everybody thought that was equal. And it is equal in numbers, but it's not equitable. And an equitable tax would actually be progressive. And so the state of Massachusetts approved by ballot measure, that was a referendum, a 4% tax on every penny that millionaires make over $1 million. And you would think, like, that's probably not going to generate a lot of wealth, right? Well, in the first year, they projected it was going to generate about $800,000, and it accidentally generated $2.3 billion. So that's not an accident. That's wealth inequality. That's showing you that there's a systemic challenge and that underfunding education and public services is fully intentional. The system is rigged. And as we knocked on doors and we tried to convince people that they actually had to care about this issue, we use that language of wealth inequality, and we built a real coalition across all communities, so many different disciplines, so many different people. When we tell people, yeah, we're talking about taxing not your taxes, an additional 4,200 people are really affected by this law. That's it. Windfalls, I know you're really concerned about that one time you're going to sell your house, are usually excluded by tax provisions. So you don't need to worry about that. And, the opposition will say millionaires flee. They actually don't. It turns out that millionaires love having good schools, or love having workers that love having good schools. They love our airport, as crappy as it might be. It's still a good airport. They love the infrastructure that our Commonwealth invests. And and people genuinely are feeling economic pressure. I think we can name a million things that people are feeling. And there's a rush to exercise that agency in a time of real political and economic uncertainty. And one thing that we can do is we can take this wealth inequality language and transpose it into our communities and into local fights. So all you have to do is crack open a school budget and you will find the wealth inequality, either across the board or within a particular family population, or even within interdepartments. And you'll notice that certain departments get more funding than others, and you start asking these real deep questions. And that's what we started to do. So, I could talk for hours on this, but what I can say is, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have decided that we really value public schools and public transportation. And we send a lot of tax money towards those two initiatives. And I have to say we are seeing some real growth benefits across the state. I would love to check back in with you all in a couple of years when it's really built momentum. This was a 2022 law, and so that takes a little bit of time. But you can do this. This is something that took us a little while, but the infrastructure that we've built, we are more than happy to share, and we are absolutely rooting for every student, educator, and working class individual in the state of Washington and across our country. So thank you for having me. Julianna has my contact information. Let us know how we can help. We are here for you.
Thank you so much. So I asked Kyle to come as a sort of a vision of what can be achieved. And because he's on East Coast time, he might not totally flow with the program. So I hope that he's able to put his kids to bed. So coming up next, we're kind of going to dig now into, if I was teaching fifth grade, I might say the wonky or the heavy stuff. And I'm not going to read a slide. However, again, these slides will be shared with you all. I'm going to just do a really high level overview of some of these pieces because it's important that we understand we need to build our confidence in talking about the revenue crisis. So Washington State is extremely unique. We don't have an income tax. Could talk about that all night long. But what we do have is an over-reliance on sales tax. Sales tax is the most regressive of all taxes because working class people pay a much higher percentage of their income or their earnings at the store when they buy basic things. So in Washington state, our sales tax is one of the highest in the nation, and it accounts for about half of our state's operating budget. So the other controversial and very unique thing about Washington's tax code is the B&O tax, business and occupation tax. It's unique in Washington because it applies to all businesses, regardless of their size. And other states that have a similar tax, they only tax profits, but Washington state taxes basically everything a business actually does to stay in business. So it is, in a sense, anti-small business. It is something that we, some of our organizations here have taken positions on it, but it is also something that the legislature is looking at this section of increasing and amending. So it's important you know that the B&O tax, it's a tax on business, but it is the wrong kind of tax on small businesses. Then we have property taxes, and we're going to talk about property taxes more in a little bit here. Property taxes are, in a sense, also regressive. Because they are driving up housing prices for renters and people that don't have that privilege of having home ownership. So while most of our property taxes are levied through voter initiatives at the local level, the state does collect a portion of that. And that does come back to us in some forms for schools. We've also got the real estate excise tax, which I'm not going to go into, and then other sources: tobacco, alcohol, insurance premium taxes, public utility taxes, and then fees and licenses. So if you look at our tax profile, what's missing? The income tax is missing, and the fact that we have the wealthiest humans ever in history of humanity in our state. We have billionaires a mile from here that are taking in money. I don't say earn because they're not earning it, taking in money every 60 seconds that is equivalent to a teacher's annual salary. That's equivalent to 2 or even 3 para-educator salaries. They're taking in that money while they're asleep at night, every 60 seconds, and they're not taxed. That's what we're here tonight, just to lay very bare for you. So the next slide, please. There's a much simpler way to sort of, thank you, a simpler way to show how unbalanced and, in a sense, how regressive our tax system is. I'm going to turn the microphone over now to James Brown, the Federal Way Education Association president. And I want to acknowledge that he and Liz Foley Bishop have been the other key bottom liners of this event. They have been with me lockstep along the way, planning this from its inception. So please, quick round of applause for James Brown.
So I'm just going to talk for a moment, if we could go to the next slide, about the specific revenue that we get in Washington state. How does Washington get the money for K-12 schools? Essentially, as Julianna was pointing out, it's through the reliance on taxes, and particularly local property taxes. And in one way in which we're particularly burdened is that anything above and beyond basic education, if we want to have anything that is supplementing what's determined to be basic education, we have to levy tax dollars into our community, go to our community, get approval for funding that will allow us to provide programming that we desperately need for our students. And it is a burden on our community. It's a burden on our school boards. It's a burden on all the teachers that are supposed to be out there, you know, lobbying and getting out there and sign waving and trying to get it. And it's very stressful. Another way that we do get our money is through federal programs and dollars that are linked to things like Title I, special education, school lunches, and other kinds of small little categorical programs. So when we want to drill it down and say, well, how did the districts get the money to run their schools? In those situations, the legislature basically is going to decide what the apportionment is per student for our education to run our schools through lawmaking. Some state monies are only going to be strings attached funds, that they're like going to be for transportation or for learning systems programs or multilingual learners. The local property taxes, the voter approved dollars, those supplement basic education. The state does try to balance those and tries to make local level levy dollars fair to districts based on how expensive they are to live in a regionalization way. And the federal programs and dollars obviously come to districts through state channels. Title I special education, again, as I talked about in the previous slide. So in the next slide, this one is kind of referring to what our state superintendent talked about a few moments ago. When you look at this and you see the big blue piece of the pie, that represents the total amount of money that's spent on K through 12 education in Washington State. And you may be tempted to say, as the superintendent said, that this is a spending problem, but in fact, it is not a spending problem. As an educator myself, and as an educator that also talks to many educators every day, we are facing realities that tell us that we are incredibly under-resourced in our schools. The main thing that you have to remember is that this pie has to get bigger. That's the way we're going to be able to make gains for our students and give them the schools that they deserve, the schools that our families deserve. And if you think about this idea of what the gross state product is in Washington State, this is how much, basically it's a measure of our state's output. Like what is the value added that our state's commerce and businesses put out for our economy? When you think about the fact, and again, our superintendent talked about this a few moments ago, when Washington basically spends 3.17% of our state GSP on K-12 education, I invite you to think about that percentage as a total amount of our gross state product, instead of thinking about that piece of the pie that we just looked at. This is despicable, and we need to make sure that we are putting more out there. Imagine what we could do if we took 50% of our gross state product and put it in schools. We don't need that much. We could have it for other things. And that's what needs to happen.
Thank you so much, James. We are going to do a little bit of shifting here in our program because we have a special guest coming in via Zoom from Olympia. And is he?
I'm going to start praying.
Actually, he's not. We're not ready yet for him, but I just want to make sure that he's queued up. Yeah, so our next student speaker, again, the reason we're all here tonight is, of course, the kids. Our next student speaker, I am honored to introduce Miles Hagopian. He is a Franklin High School student. He's going to give us his perspective and his take, and he has the privilege of introducing our legislator tonight. So Miles Hagopian, everyone.
Hello, my name is Miles. Yeah, him. I go to Franklin as well. And I just wanted to talk about an article that I recently helped write with my dad that I got in the South Seattle Emerald about school funding. And I wrote this article after the passing of Quincy Jones, who went to Garfield High School. And in the article, I talk about how my band and orchestra programs at my school were recently just merged into one class, which has made like our learning way harder, and our teacher have a much more stressful job than she otherwise would have. And we don't even have a jazz band, and that's like something that I always like wanted because I come from a family of musicians. Which is funny because Kenny G, like one of the most famous, most wealthy musicians, went to our school, and we don't even have these basic programs. But I really don't think it should be up to like celebrities like Kenny G or even Quincy Jones, someone who's given loads of money to Garfield and Washington Middle School for their programs. I think our state, which has some of the richest people, should just simply do the logical thing and make those people pay their fair share and give our schools the programs they deserve, the arts programs, the counselors, the ethnic studies programs, And even just smaller class sizes for the basic classes that have like sometimes 40 students in one class. It's absurd. So that's my perspective on that.
What I said about how technology is perfect, and this is really unusual that we're having a technology issue. All right, so hybrid events, who's with me? Eh? We love the in-person and the tech and the juggling. If you are an educator and you went through the pandemic, you know this may be a little bit triggering for some of us. The stress of having a lot of people, especially big parents, watching you through a screen, be a teacher online. So our next speaker is Shaun Scott. However, I don't know if he is actually in the webinar. Okay, so Miles again is going to tell us a little bit about Shaun Scott, and then we'll hear directly from our champion down there in Olympia.
Cool. Shaun Scott was just voted actually, I think this year to be the Washington State representative for the 43rd legislative district. Yeah. He's a member of ESA and he's the author of Heartbreak City, Seattle Sports and Urban Progress. And I actually got to go to that book talk and it was really amazing. So yeah, it's an honor to introduce Shaun. I didn't even know when's the last time we've had like a socialist as a representative in our state. So that's really cool. So yeah, let's welcome Shaun Scott. Yeah.
Miles, thank you so much for that. The wonderful introduction, Julianna, other comrades who extended the invitation to talk tonight. Very, very grateful. Is my audio level okay if I'm speaking at this volume?
Talk louder.
Okay, so I got the instruction to talk louder. So I heard in your introduction, Miles, the question asked when the last time actually a Democratic Socialist or a socialist was sent to the Washington State Legislature. The answer is 1912. It was a socialist from the Mason County area by the name of Representative William Kingery. I should put respect on his name. He was somebody who stood up for capping the workday at 8 hours. He was somebody that fought for better workforce housing and affordable housing for working people in Washington State. He was somebody who fought for work persons' compensations in the state of Washington. And so this fight that we have on our hands, oh, and I should also mention, he advocated for fully funding Washington State schools by liquidating the Washington State militia's assets and taking those funds and using them to fund better classrooms, more schools. So this fight that we have on our hands to make sure that we are fully funding all aspects of education is one that has been many generations in the making. It is a fight that we have seen progress on in some generations, a backslide in others. And right now we are at a pivotal moment where I think through our activism, through our advocacy, through us contacting our legislators, and perhaps most importantly, through us showing up in Olympia, we can make a generational difference to make Washington State's public school system the class of the rest of the country. I'm actually talking to you right now from my apartment in Olympia. State lawmakers are required to move. State lawmakers are, I shouldn't say required, generally as a matter of custom, live very, very close to the state capitol here in Olympia while session is going on. That can be very, very onerous. It can be very difficult for lawmakers like myself that don't live in the Olympia area. My district is the 43rd legislative district, as Miles had mentioned. That's Wallingford, Capitol Hill, the University District in Seattle. So 65, 70 miles away from Olympia. It's a sacrifice to be here in many ways. And it can be a very, very lonely environment as well for lawmakers that come down. But a comrade recently explained it to me, saying that I'm actually one of the most supported lawmakers in Olympia because I ran on a platform that's about bringing in as many different voices as we can. In the course of my race in our campaign in order to win this seat, We galvanized education advocates, people that cared about making sure that we're fully funding reproductive access, people that care about expanding and protecting labor rights in the state of Washington. And as a result, I know that we have a huge coalition, not just in the city of Seattle, but across the state, that knows it needs to see more economic justice champions in Olympia. And so that's what I stand on. Those are the issues that I ran on, and those are the issues that I'm going to do my best to advocate for and fight for here in Olympia. Right now, we are in a situation where people are talking about austerity. People are talking about defunding the programs that we all use, underfunding public schools, slashing funding to valuable services like disability services and climate programs. That is a prerogative of the incoming governor. He has made no bones about that. He has been very transparent, to his credit, in saying that his intention is to implement across the board at least 6% cuts on all state agencies. In some of our state agencies, that is going to be the difference between wildfire mitigation planning and not having it. That's going to be the difference between disability services in our schools and not having them. There's one state agency that, in response to the governor's ask for potential cuts, put forward the proposition of reducing a statewide conference for disabled students from 2 days to 1 day in an attempt to help Washington State, which is home to some of the richest corporations in human history, save what amounts to budgetary dust in an attempt to avoid taxing major corporations to fund those services. I believe that that is unacceptable from our governor, our incoming governor. It's something that I know many of our colleagues on the House Finance Committee, on which I sit, are going to fight tooth and nail against. But I also want to make it clear that that fight is going to be one that is made much easier and more effective when we have people outside of the halls of power and outside of the walls of the state legislative building making that point of view heard. So I hope as part of the training or as part of this teach-in, we're also including how we can sign up to testify, lawmakers' contact informations in the districts where you might reside, how to come up with talking points to make sure that we're making legislators feel the urgency of fully funding education and the programs that we all use. And historically, I think I'm going to try to wrap up on this point. When that fight takes place collectively, as opposed to one or two individual lawmakers trying to make it happen, we win. We might not win in one session. It might take a couple of sessions, but eventually we will win out because most state lawmakers are not used to having that kind of populist pressure applied. When you come to Olympia, you see fossil fuel lobbyists, you see lobbyists for charter schools, you see lobbyists for major corporations. Many lawmakers swim in this water, and they're not used to being exposed to the energy of people outside of the state capitol during legislative session. So when we bring that energy and when we bring that fight and we bring that urgency, we will win eventually. So it was so great to be able to come here and talk with everybody for a minute. Please make sure to pass on my legislative information. I can drop that in the chat if anybody has any questions, and solidarity with everybody that made it out to tonight's teach-in.
Okay, my name's Sam. I'm a sophomore at Franklin with Miles. Okay. Protests, sit-ins, walkouts, and demonstrations don't work. They don't work. You know why? Because there will always be people who will disagree with you, and some of them will have enough wealth and power to try to stop you. But you know, that's not bad. People disagreeing with you is good. That is what makes our society so great, that people have the freedom to express their opinions and act on them within reason. But demonstrations don't work until they do. Demonstrations are only as good as the people who participate and plan and support them. If you protest for something that you believe in once, you can't expect that everyone will magically change their minds. You have to be persistent. You have to be willing to go out and protest as much as you think that belief is worth. I repeat, you have to be persistent. I've talked to many of my friends at my school, Franklin, at other schools like Garfield, Cleveland. I've talked to kids who attend public schools throughout the greater Seattle area. And we all agree that our schools are lacking something, whether that's healthy, good food, special education funding, college pathways, fairly paid teachers, and even enough chairs for everyone in the classroom. In the beginning of the year, my math class did not have enough chairs and desks for everyone. Some kids are still sharing desks today. And that's an example of the lack of resources in the public school system. Another being the time that I spoke in middle school at a Seattle school board meeting, trying to convince them not to cut the dual immersion Spanish program. I would like to live in a world where there's healthy, good food offered during lunch, enough special education funding, clear college pathways, and enough desks for everyone in the classroom. I don't want to be afraid of language classes being cut, and I bet I'm not the only person in this room who would agree with me. We live in a city with 11 billionaires and over 50,000 millionaires, so I don't think that public school students should be going without desks and other vital resources. The youth are ready to be persistent. They're ready to fight for the funding that our schools need, and we will show up until it works. And now I have the honor to introduce Stefanie McIrvin. She's the Renton School Board President, and this is her second term on the school board. She has a background in higher education with an emphasis on expanding dual credit opportunities for students. I will let her take it from here.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Julianna, Meesh, everybody who put this together. It's really great, and it is a pleasure and honor to be here with y'all tonight. So we're going to drink from the fire hose a little bit, and we're going to talk about the prototypical school funding model. And my perspective about it, and hopefully we'll all leave with some common language about what it is and how we can hopefully reform it in the near future. So, what is the prototypical school model? Oh, go back. I will. Okay, thanks. All right. So when the legislature created the PSM, they were attempting, keyword, to design a framework that would fairly allocate funding based on a standardized model for all districts across the state. And it was initially designed as a funding mechanism, not as a mandate to tell schools how to operate. And what they tried to do was create flexibility for districts to adapt to their own local needs. But as we know, all good intentions do not actually always translate to positive outcomes. So how does the PSM work? Well, it is a basis for funding, and it's based on assumed enrollment numbers at the elementary, middle, and high school level. There are specific staffing ratios that determine the allocations provided for certain roles like teachers, principals, counselors, paraeducators. And again, while the framework provides funding, it's the districts along with their collective bargaining units that decide how to actually allocate the funds. So you'll see on the next slide, this is some of the student to staff ratios under the current model. It's not everybody, but it's quite a few of them. Note that there are very large student to staff ratios, large ratios here. So for example, it takes 400 elementary students to generate 0.311 of a social worker. So I like to think of it in another way. It actually takes 1,200 students to generate one full-time social worker. And that's not for one elementary school, that's for an entire district. So you can quickly see how this basic education funding is falling short. So let's talk about some real world impacts, some examples. So for us in Renton, we are typically spending $12 million in local levy funds, which we talked about are from local property taxes, We spend $12 million annually to cover those special education funding gaps. We spend 1.7 million every year just to cover costs like insurance and utilities. And we spend another 3 million to cover transportation funding gaps. So that's a lot of money every single year that we are having to use our local funding. We'd rather use those funds to go above and beyond, to help in new, exciting ways, new initiatives, new staff. But we can't do that because we have to cover just the basics to get by every year. So what are we talking about here? The limitations to the current model. The model was designed to be flexible, but let's be honest, it's actually quite inflexible and it fails to meet actual student needs. It is based on assumptions from the 1970s. So let's just say, if you saw Jaws or the first Star Wars movie in theaters for the first time, that's how old this data is and why it has such an impact on our modern education system. And not only that, but it forces districts to rely on local levies, which further exacerbates inequities between our districts. So let's talk about some recommendations for modernization real quick. So many of us here tonight, many work groups, we have recommendations. First things first, we need to update those staffing ratios to address the critical funding gaps. We need to fully fund special education. We need matching MSOC, those utility costs, funding for real world costs. So we need to actually get funding to cover all of the inflationary costs that everybody is experiencing these days. And we need to reform transportation funding formulas. So lastly, I know we have a lot of more folks who are going to be talking about how we can work together on moving forward. But I am hopeful as a board member that if we continue what we're doing like we are tonight and we're working together, that we will have a larger voice and we'll have a larger impact. One example that we have done in Renton, that I think Julianna and I are pretty proud of, is we have a joint legislative letter that we will be sending to our legislators in our area. And it has representation from our district staff, from our board, and from REA. So we are trying to align on these issues to have a greater impact, which of course, we all hope will create better outcomes for every student. So I know that was a lot. Thank you.
So a couple things about Dr. McIrvin is that she is very humble, and I think she's done more for our school board and our district than she even realizes. The legislative advocacy letter that she mentioned isn't done yet because our school board is being so responsive to our requests to lift up the issue of ESP wages. So I don't know yet if it's getting in there, but I've made it very clear that my association, Renton Education Association, we represent CERTs and teachers and counselors and nurses. We will not sign that unless it does include ESP wages as a condition of state funding increases. So shout out to all of the ESPs who run our schools. They are the most vital of any other. Thank you. And you can see why I invited our president here tonight. She's fantastic. Our next speaker is a friend of mine and is going to talk to us about, well, I don't even know if I should say what she's going to talk about. She's going to talk about the elephant in the room, which is special education. And I think this is Steph Price. She wants to come down a little bit closer. She's got some slides, hopefully that she'll be able to pull up here. We could have a whole teach-in on special education. So we're asking Steph to give us a really quick just check in on what are the key issues from her perspective as a speech language pathologist in a federal way. Steph.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get to the slides so I can see them in front of me instead of having to turn around. Sorry. All right, so as Julianna mentioned, I am Steph Price, my pronouns are she, they. I am a speech language pathologist, and I have been a public school speech therapist for 15 years. So, also though, I am the parent of a student who receives special education services. I know what it's like to be on both sides of the table. I know what it's like to hear from your admin, I'm sorry, we can't do that. We don't have enough money, enough resources, right? I know what it's like to hear as a parent from the district, yeah, we don't do that because we don't have the funding for that, and we don't have the time or the resources for that. And it sucks to hear it from both sides of the table. I'm just gonna be really honest, okay? So just a brief overview of IDEA. IDEA and title funding are vital federal programs. This is how our schools get funding to support students who need the most support, our students who receive special education services, our students who are multilingual, students who are at risk of falling behind. IDEA and title funding are critical programs to ensure that our schools have what they need to be successful and our students have the education that they deserve, okay? IDEA started in 1975. For those of you who are not great at math like me, that was 50 years ago, okay? In 50 years, IDEA has never been fully funded, never. They have promised, they being the government, has promised to fund 40%. That hasn't even happened. Consistently, IDEA has only been funded at 13 to 15% below the target, which leaves states and local districts to cover the shortfall. I personally am tired of hearing the false narrative that our schools are failing, okay? Our schools are not failing, our teachers are not failing, and our students are not failing. Our local and federal governments are failing to fund public education and special education. Educators keep being asked to do more with less. We have staffing shortages, higher caseloads, less resources, larger class sizes, and so on, and so on, and so on. You all know how it goes. It is time to change this. We need equitable funding. I have been doing this for 15 years because I love it. And also, I almost quit my job last year because I was tired of hearing, we just can't hire anybody, so you have to have 57 students on your caseload. It's absurd and it's not equitable because our students are not getting what they deserve. When you push more students into a classroom, when you put more students on a caseload, they do not get the services that they need. So when we talk about, sorry, slides froze. Maybe it's operator error. I wouldn't put it past me. All right, sweet. So when we talk about special education funding, right? In 2022, 2023, the total spending for special education lagged expenditures by $523.5 million. That is so much money that we are not getting for our students, okay? IDEA being fully funded means we have more teachers, we have more paras, we have behavior specialists. For those of you who are in the classroom, you know how critical behavior specialists are right now in the last few years. We have more assistive technology, we have more trainings, we have more access to resources and materials, we can get counselors, we could have the things our students need, okay? According to NEA, $23 billion per year is needed to fully fund IDEA. For context, it would only take one of the richest individuals in Washington state, one, to fully fund IDEA. If Jeff Bezos paid for fully funding IDEA, just as an example, not a suggestion, okay? He would still have a net worth of $177 billion. Before to Washington in 2020, I joined 40,000 of my colleagues on the steps of the Oklahoma State Capitol. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Let me tell you, we were there to demand equitable funding for public education in the face of a governor who said teachers are just like teenagers who want a brand new car. We got up in the state capitol and said, "Where's our car?" and shook our keys in her face because we knew that our students deserved a fully funded education. We won $479 million. When we come together, when we work together, when we stand in solidarity with each other, we can make a difference. We can make a difference. Before I pass the mic to Meesh Vecchio, who is the Seattle Education Association president and former special educator, I am going to read you a quote from the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. "The richest nation on earth has never allocated enough resources to build sufficient schools, to compensate adequately its teachers, and to surround them with the prestige our work justifies. We squander funds on highways, on the frenetic pursuits of recreation, on the overabundance of overkill armament. But we pauperize education." I'll pass it to Meesh.
So on the screen behind me and on your screen at home, what was the McCleary decision and how does it matter now? Who here remembers fighting the McCleary fight? Lots of hands. What was it? 10-year-long fight where educators, families, school districts, unionists, everyone got together and fought. And why it matters is because even with the Supreme Court decision ruling in favor of mandating our legislator to amply fund public education, it still took continued lobbying and continued advocacy. Why does it matter now? We already know and we already believe it is Washington's paramount duty to fund basic education. McCleary reminds us of this. This is the duty through the Constitution. It is the right of all students. And why it matters now is this is another McCleary moment. This is a time to collectively ask our legislators to fulfill the promise of McCleary. That is why we are all here tonight. That is why we are going to be fighting in Olympia together. We need to make sure that we are not just adequately funding education. We're fulfilling the constitutional requirement that we are amply funding education. Fun fact, Washington State became a state for public education. Who knew that? That's why our constitutional language is so very strong and strongest in the nation. All right, we are now going to hear from another association leader in our neighborhood. Debbie Aldous, give me a thumbs up if Debbie is ready. Awesome. Debbie Aldous is the Tukwila Education Association president, a math teacher, and has a little bit of a myopic focus on a thing that happens to school districts that some of us didn't know could happen to school districts. The crisis is real in Tukwila. I'm going to let Debbie speak to what many of us in this room could be facing very soon if we continue to honor our collective bargaining agreements and pay our union members what they have bargained. Binding conditions. What does that make you think of? Debbie's going to tell us all about it. Let's give Debbie a round of applause.
Thank you. I'm not seeing myself on the screen or my slide yet.
You are on the screen and the slide is, we see the slide. We see your introduction slide. Do you want us to move to
that one? Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Aldous. I am a math teacher and the Tukwila EA president, as Julianna just said, in Tukwila, Washington. We're a very small urban district just south of Seattle. We have just about 2,700 students in our district with an annual budget of around $60 million. We are an example of the system is crumbling already. Districts have been juggling and trying to fill the gaps for far too many years, and it has hit the fan in Tukwila, so to speak. Last year, our district was required by the state, because of the binding conditions, to cut their budget by $14.3 million. That was about 20% of our budget. Imagine your personal budget being cut by a fifth. That meant that we lost approximately 16% of our staff. I heard Sam mention not having seats in math class. I can tell you in my middle school, right now we have classes of 40 students, 39 students. Many of those students are also special education and MLL. How did Tukwila get to this point? Well, on the slide in front of you, I hope you can see it. We've got 4 key areas we've honed in on as our gaps, same as you're going to be hearing about as well here. Special education, transportation, MSOC, and substitute teachers. What we can show you here is the biggest hit is to special education, which, as we've just heard from Steph, our most vulnerable students. And this caused a funding gap just in these 4 areas of just over $18 million since 2020. When you're in a district with an annual budget of $60 million, $18 million is a significant amount of our budget. We couldn't even recover with the ESSER funds that came in. We are in what is now called binding conditions, and we have a second year this school year right now to get our deficit back in the black. If not, the state could take us over. There are currently 5 districts in the state in this situation: LaConner, Marysville, Mount Baker, Prescott, and Tukwila. It has been highly unusual in the past for any district to find themselves in binding conditions. The fact that there are 5 right now, I just have to, we are the proverbial canary in the coal mine. The system is crumbling, and it is impacting students right now in my district, in my school, and in these other 5 school districts. I posted a quick link here to an article the Seattle Times posted about our 5 districts and what binding conditions can mean. We're very short on time, so I don't want to take more this evening, but thank you for hearing us, and I appreciate everyone for putting this evening together.
Thank you so much, Debbie. We're titling this section here that we're in this moment now. And I'm just going to name the fact that Dr. McIrvin didn't mention it, but my school district, Renton, is set to make $15 million in cuts this coming year. That's 5% of our overall budget. This is coming off of $22 million in cuts last year. It is a strange world when the educator union is telling the district, please don't cut HR. Just let that sink in. Please don't cut HR, because the level of errors and the lag on so many things that we need for our members is really due to shortfalls in the central office. So as we look towards cuts next year in Renton, we don't want cuts to admin. Like, if you could see my face, that's bonkers. We don't want cuts to admin because they are responsible for our evaluations. They are responsible for doing the level of behavior support and going to bat for us and defending us when when things are wrong. So it's a strange world we're living in, and it's even stranger to say that Bellevue School District, which many of us consider maybe one of the richest places in the world, is in dire straits. So our next presenter is Jill Rock, the Education Association president from Bellevue, PA. And look at that amazing picture.
It's Halloween. It's Halloween.
Yeah, whatever. I found it on Facebook. I'm glad it's there. Let's go, Jill.
Thank you, Julianna. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jill Rock. I'm a special education teacher, and I'm the president of the Bellevue Education Association. And I will speak louder. To start off, actually, to echo what Julianna was saying, there are assumptions that Bellevue is a rich district and that we're not immune to budget deficits. And this just simply isn't true. 2 years ago, we had to close 2 elementary schools, and that was a painful decision that has had lasting impacts. Rising operation costs and inflation have left the Bellevue School District underfunded by nearly $30 million since 2020, with an annual funding gap of $9 million. Since 2020, the Bellevue School District has spent $133 million more on special education than the state has provided us. So we use local levy funds to fill the gap. Our district has shared with us that they will need to reduce spending by $16 million for next school year, and that's on top of the $10 million that they're cutting from this school year. So every district is feeling the burden of budget cuts. And I'm very honored to speak tonight, but I will be very honest that when I was asked to speak, I shared that I had some reservations because we're in the middle of contract negotiations. This is a bargaining year for us, and I have some fear that I might actually just say something to make things inadvertently worse, because that's very true, it's possible. But rather than shying away from it, I think I'm just gonna lean right into why this is so difficult. When we bargain with ample funding, we can do amazing things for our students. We can lower our class sizes. We can lower our caseload sizes for special education, for our therapists, for our psychologists, our OTs, our PTs, our SLPs. We can be innovative and we can expand programs. All this to help our students thrive. But when we're in a budget crisis, we fight for scraps. People get pit against each other. And who stands to lose from this? Everybody. Our educators, our families, and mostly our students. In Bellevue, we have a saying, our educators' working conditions are our students' learning conditions. And that's the truth. When we make things better for the system, including paying educators a fair wage, lowering class sizes, and funding resources and supports, everybody wins. But our current reality is contrary to this. We're expected to do more with less, and you've heard a lot of people say that tonight. We're expected to give things up because we can no longer afford what we have. And every time a district has to give something up, whether that's closing schools or losing the 7-period day, or even just giving up 1 day of pay, that signals to other districts that this is the new norm and we just take a loss. And it signals to the state that we accept less funding, but that is unacceptable. Education is built on teacher guilt. And I'll say that again. Education is built, it relies on teacher guilt. Every time an educator works past their contract day, they work on the nights and weekends, they work on their sick days, or they pay for materials for students from their own pockets, that reinforces that the state doesn't have to fix a broken system. But why do educators do this? Because we love our students. And if we don't step up, it seems like nobody else will. This is unsustainable, and our educators are leaving the profession. Our students are the ones who are feeling the impact most. So the time is now to fulfill the paramount duty of fully funding education, and we all need to act right now.
All right, we have a number of other speakers, so I'm gonna zoom really fast here. Coming up next, we're gonna talk a little bit about why is it so hard for the general public or maybe legislators to understand what we mean when we say what is regressivity. And our next speaker, I just texted her. I don't know if you forgot the text, Renee, but we're behind schedule. How fast can you make your lesson comprehensible? It's very fast. All right, this is an incredibly brilliant teacher from the Highline School District. Renee Agatsuma is going to talk to us about our brains and about how we, there we go, dropping off materials to the students in the audience. Let's go, Renee. Talking about how our brains are kind of the problem here and maybe a barrier to why we have such a regressive system in Washington State when it comes to understanding inequality. Renee Agatsuma, everyone.
Hi, everybody. I teach in Evergreen High School, teach science. I also work a lot on numeracy as a science teacher. It's really important that we understand like big numbers, but unfortunately, our brains don't actually understand those big numbers. So anything larger than 5, which you can't see on the slides here, but you guys can see some of the time, like we actually have a way of like kind of understanding, and when we group things, we can actually understand them. So it's really hard for us to understand it. I actually have a binder, and those of you who are on Zoom can like click on the link on the thing eventually and see like 1 million stars. There's a binder if y'all want to pass it around. It has 1 million stars inside the binder. helps you actually see how many a million actually is. And when we are talking about things like billionaires, that's 1,000 of those binders. There are 100 sheets in there. That is like, that is 1/5 of one ream of paper. So it would be 20 reams of paper to show 1 billion stars. This is a huge number. There's actually a lot of ways that we do not understand that as people. So the next slide just has pictures of how many people in Washington State make over $15 million, and how many people are living below 200% of federal poverty level. So really getting like how much 1 billion is, it's 1,000 of those binders that are being passed around, or 20 reams of paper. Really important for us to understand how much money we're actually talking about.
Thank you, Renee. Super fast. Way to go, teacher. All right, we've got 2 labor leaders coming up who I've texted, but apparently they didn't get the text that they're up next. So this event was really the brainchild of some of us on the MLK Labor Council in the K-12 sector. And part of this event is doing the things differently rather than having educators talk about the problems, understanding that it is not an education issue in a silo. Education impacts everybody. So we have 2 of our labor leaders coming up to talk, and I'm going to ask them to do what Renee just did and talk as fast as you can. And because we still have some really incredible speakers to talk about solutions and how we're going to get there. So Dan, you're first. You need to be sitting right here. Actually, I'll give my seat up to Dan House. He's going to read his slide, and then he's going to introduce our other labor leader. As fast as you can. Let's go. Dan for Dan.
Thank you. Good evening. Right. Nope, I don't know. How's this working?
It's not, you're not controlling it. Just talk. Just talk.
Okay.
Just like, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's for you. Don't worry about that. That's good.
Okay, sorry. Hi, my name's Dan House. I'm with UFCW 3000. I'm a grocery worker at Metropolitan Market in Crown Hill, and I'm a shop steward there, and also a member of the executive board of my union. We're the largest local in the state. We represent over 50,000 workers in the grocery and healthcare healthcare industries. And so why should workers in our industries care about public funding public education? Well, many of my coworkers are parents, are parents of public school students, and I've seen the way that the underfunding of our schools causes them to make tough choices about showing up to work or picking up the slack of our underfunded schools. And if we were funding public schools adequately, that would be one less thing on the weighing on the minds of our workers. And so yeah, sorry.
All right, and so I'm tripping up people that are up next. So our next speaker is Billy Hetherington, and he is the 2nd generation union member and involved in several CTE advisory boards around King County. And going to talk about something very specific when it comes to employee funding. And then we're going to fly through some slides on wealth tax. And coming up next will be Oliver Miska, and then Jesse Hagopian and Rita Green. So if they could cue themselves up here, that would be great.
Good evening, everybody. Again, like Julianna said, my name is Billy Hetherington, 2nd generation Lioness member. Lioness Labor International Union North America. So we are a construction local. We represent about 7,000 workers right here that work in King County, while only probably half of them can afford to live in King County. But, you know, I've been taking in a lot of information tonight, a lot of really great information. Again, like my bio says, I do serve on 3 or 4 CTE advisory boards. I'm the advisory chair for the Highline School District. I've been over a 20-year member of Lina. You know, I graduated from the Kent School District, born and raised here in Washington. Went to graduate from WSU. Did some things in banking, and then just decided to get into the construction industry like my father did. And spending time in there and being away, I'm about 25 years now. I'm aging myself out of high school. When I came out of the field and took a job with my local, my first job was an apprenticeship. And getting back into the schools and seeing how they changed over the last 20 to 30 years was really a downer to me. I mean, it just seemed like we had access to several different types of careers. And, you know, now I know a lot of the schools are really getting back into pushing CTE programs and getting away from standardized testing and all that kind of stuff. And that's really a benefit to how we partner with different locals or different labor organizations. You know, the building trades, we do represent a lot of custodial workers that work within your schools. You know, UFCW, other trades, the lunch people, the bus drivers, a lot of that different stuff. They're all union members, and they have the same struggles that you all have. And Julianna brought me here to try to see how do we all bind together on the same issue that we're having. You know, we're trying to get more jobs for our membership through you know, through passing bonding packages for your school districts to get your facilities up to code and up to where you need. So you're working in a classroom that you can feel proud of and educate your students without having the roof cave in or worry about a leak or worry about this or worry about that. And that, you know, that's where we've partnered with you know, the EAs in the past. And we found a lot of good success in, you know, partnering with the EAs and going to the school boards and talking about project labor agreements and community workforce agreements. And, you know, I can go on to, you know, we've got time today, don't have the time today to go into a lot of that stuff. But my message is to really reach out to find out who else is unionized within your district, reach out to the building trades area, you know, folks in your area, and really bring them on board and educate them on your issues, and then partner with them to make a mutual benefit, right? So that's about all I got to say.
All right, so we understand how important this is, it's an intersectional issue, and really tonight, we could talk to you about taxes, and looking at the time, we really don't have time to go into the depths of the tax proposals. Everybody who registered will get these slides, and you can read some summaries of the kinds of revenue that we're going to ask you to go to Olympia to fight for, the kinds of revenue that we need all of us to look deeply at and figure out, what am I willing to do? There is a really important document we're going to share with you about how to talk about specifically the wealth tax, but I'm going to let our next guest speak to you about some very specific actions that you can take. And the way this is set up is for you to sign up, get the updates, be linked in right away to the most, dare I say, badass education funding group in our state. So this is Oliver Miska. I'm going to ask him to talk quickly because right after Oliver, we've got 2 incredible speakers, and then our closer, Larry, get up here. You're closing in about 10 minutes. Okay, Oliver Miska, everyone.
Hi, it's Oliver Miska. But thanks for having me. So much good information that just came out, and I'm really thankful for it and how it was honestly displayed in these calls a lot, and that was very digestible. So I'm here today to talk about Fund Our Schools, which is a broad coalition of multiple organizations that have come together, really promoting different strategies to take action at the legislature this session to fight for equitable and fully funded schools through passing progressive revenue. So the Fund Our Schools Coalition really came out of fighting to keep our schools open here in Seattle. We had a proposal to close 20 schools, given the fact that we had over $100 million deficit. And we fought against that along with a lot of parent organizations, some of whom are here, who are gonna be unmuted here in a second, I think on Zoom if we can muster it, from the $1 billion bake sale altogether for Seattle schools. But it also includes the Seattle Student Union, altogether for Seattle schools, the NAACP Youth Council, Black Lives Matter at School. You're gonna hear from some folks here in a second, and the Big Five. We've been really working together and building out a way we can actually take action this session. There's been a lot of talk like, what are the problems? What are the problems? What are the problems? We know the problems. Let's take some action. So this first slide that you're looking at now has our link tree. That is kind of our hub and our home base for all of the actions we'll be releasing throughout the session. The roadmap that you can see if you go back to the one slide before that has a number of actions as soon as January 30th, which is the $1 billion bake sale, February 1st, which is the Youth Advocacy Summit, which I know some folks are involved in planning here, where youth are going to be meeting with legislators and educating each other about how to take action during the session. We have WEA's Day on there on February 17th. And we're through all of this. We have Sunday planning meetings bi-weekly where we're meeting with everyone who's been interested in meeting and just talking and planning for the session, gearing up towards 2 days, March 5th, which is a statewide day of action, which we're planning with the Washington Youth Alliance, which is the state chapter for the Seattle Student Union. So like the statewide network of student unions. And then tax day, April 15th. So those are the days we're working on building, we're having days of action in Olympia, but while we do that, every Wednesday, we are going to be having Wealth Tax Wednesday because Bob Ferguson, our new governor, who Shaun Scott said making 6% sweeping cuts to agencies across the state, said he wasn't cutting education, but did cut the wealth tax, which would actually generate billions of dollars for education. So he's saying he's not cutting education dollars, he actually is. So we're responding, launching tomorrow on his beautiful inauguration day, an email campaign so that he is greeted with the emails that he deserves to say that he's a disappointment and to say that he for cutting the labor for the wealth tax. So as I said, every Wednesday, we're encouraging folks, how do you take action? What if you can't meet us in Olympia every single Wednesday, 3 to 5 p.m. at the Sundial, which is conveniently between the two legislative buildings. And so that's where we trap all the legislators. They're like, hey, don't. Cute little place to hang out. That's where it will be. If you can't make it, wear red. You can post on social media, fund our schools, wealth tax, hashtags, WALEDGE, and I like budget busting Bob personally, but that's just me. So we're going to be really launching that email campaign, hosting weekly events in Olympia and at your school, wearing red every week, and calling on our legislators to take action and be the bad guy that Bob Ferguson made them be to pass this wealth taxes session. So come plan with us on Sundays, come organize with us in Olympia on Wednesdays, and send some emails tomorrow morning. Don't send it yet because it'll go to Jay Inslee, but send it in the morning. We'll be releasing all this on our Fund Our Schools Instagram and on our link tree. So yeah, thank you.
All right, our last guest speakers tonight. Maybe we saved the best for last. I don't know. I love you all, but Jesse Hagopian and Rita Green are going to let us know some of their wisdom and insight. And we've got about 5 minutes left, so our closer should be up here, and I'm going to introduce him as soon as Rita and Jesse are finished. Can you find slide 21 there, Meesh? 21? That's, I think, yeah. If we can find it. Okay. I'm gonna let them speak because we're just about out of time. So Rita Green, everybody. Yeah.
Apologies to everyone.
This is slide 21. Which slide?
It's the call to action. Thank you. I can do that.
Yeah, so it's call to action.
Go and start running.
Hi, everybody. Rita Green. I'm going to show that slide, so I'm going to get to that. Sorry. It's right before the purchase. So think of somebody mentioned about we're being pitted against each other, listening to the CTE person that just spoke. We all have to really understand how funding works because the way the state funds education, it actually pits CTE against public education. So it's really learned that. On this, so what's missing on this sign? So when it says advocate together, the first thing when I was looking at the slides, I don't see parents or community there. And so when we talk about collaboration, you got to have the parents and community be part of it. I'm not an educator, I'm just a parent, but I'm a parent who knows that we need to fully fund education. And so when I look at that, I'm not included in that group, right? So we have to be mindful of that as educators, that you can't do it, right? And so we need everybody to work together, because they are pitting us against each other. It's not about race, it's about class. And that's what we have to educate everyone to. In Washington State, we have a pretty good voting percentage. I think 80% of the people voted, but when it's a non-presidential year, it drops to like 30–40%. So I think as educators, when you're in the classroom, you have to build relationships with your students' parents to educate them so that they start learning and understanding why it's important, because we have to have all of us working together to get fully funded.
Yay, thank you.
Hey everybody, Jesse Hagopian, educator in Seattle here, and the funding crisis really struck home for me when I got an email from my school district saying that they were going to start putting kids in debt for their school lunch debt. So they wrote this, quote, "It is the responsibility of families and students to ensure that their student meal accounts are paid in full prior to purchase of meals. Failure to pay for meals may result in the accrual of debt in the student's account. For students who qualify for free and reduced meal benefits, your student may accrue additional charges for any a la carte items or second meals." So our plan in this state for funding schools is to charge kindergartners for taking an extra apple in the lunch line, while we have billionaires like Bezos eating caviar on his way up to outer space, right? This is an absurdity that we cannot live with. And the only way we're going to change this is if we link arms, like Rita said, collectively, parents, caregivers, students, educators, everybody together in the fight. And when we think about how we won the McCleary funding, it's often told through a narrative of legal battle, where lawyers worked it out and then we got the funding we needed. Except for that forgets the fact that we had one of the biggest uprisings in my lifetime, the Occupy movement, that was saying it's the 99% of us versus the 1%, and we occupied the Capitol building, right? And a group of us educators here from Seattle who were union educators in a group called Social Equity Educators, we went down there, we unfurled a banner that said lawmakers, and then that was crossed out and it said lawbreakers need to fully fund education. And then we managed to get into the House Ways and Means Committee meeting where they were getting ready to slash billions of dollars from the education budget because of the Great Recession. And with the Occupy movement rocking the halls all around the House Ways and Means Committee meeting, and a group of us educators inside that meeting, we might check the room and disrupted their budget cutting session. We read out the state constitution that said it was the paramount duty to fully fund education. And then we said, we're at the scene of a crime right here, not just breaking any law, but the paramount law of the state. So I actually brought out some plastic handcuffs and invited this legislature to come into my custody for a citizen's arrest. The police officer in the chamber didn't have the same interpretation of the law as I can, and if you can believe it, had the audacity to arrest me instead of the legislature. So I spent the evening in jail, but my students saw what had happened, and they started a Free Mr. Hagopian Facebook page. And when I got out, they claimed victory, and then they decided to to go for more. And they changed the title of the Facebook page from Free Mr. Hagopian to Walk Out Against the Budget Cuts. And there were over 500 students who didn't just walk out of Garfield High School, they made pamphlets about what the budget cuts were going to do to the school and signs. And they marched to City Hall and demanded an audience with the mayor. They got their picture in the New York Times. They organized a citywide coalition. These students built a group, Students for Change, and they coordinated a citywide walkout. And this was all in the run-up to the McCleary decision. They had hundreds of students walking out all over, and that within a month after those walkouts, the state Supreme Court ruled in favor of adding billions of dollars to state education. There's a lesson there. We have to fight. We have to build grassroots organizing. We have to do everything. Let's send those emails tomorrow, right? Let's wear red shirts on Wednesday. But if we really want to win, we got to be ready to go and surround these lawbreakers, right? And call them out for what they are. And be ready to do direct action, to do protests, to fight for the wealth that we're all creating that they're stealing from us. Thank you.
I don't know who the next speaker to follow that.
Oh, that's tough. That's
But
tough.
I get to say, I did nominate this person for WA president. I'm just gonna remind you of that, Larry.
I do remember that.
All right, great. So our last speaker is the closer, and we're a little bit over time, so I'm gonna let Larry close this down while there's a screen up here for what you can do next. Next steps are coming. Larry Delaney, WA president.
Perfect. Thank you, Juliana. I'll just start by saying I did see Jaws when it came out at the Coliseum Theater. Fifth and Pike or Pine and down it became the Old Navy or something. I don't know, but that's just some perspective on where I'm coming from here. So Juliana, James, Meesh, Jill, educators, parents, community members, our most important stakeholders, our students. Thank you for being here. This is a start. Sometimes I'm accused of bringing sports analogies, sports ball analogies into spaces where they don't belong. But, you know, I'd liken what's happening here to, I don't know, you're in the locker room before the game. And you say, oh, did I have a sandwich or something like that? Did mom bring my Gatorade? Did, you know what? You know, this is not the game yet. This is the precursor to the precursor to the game. And so I just want to close by saying yes to what everyone said. I was writing notes, and you all brought good stuff in here. Superintendent Reykdal reminded us this is a funding crisis. You know, that's first and foremost what we have is a funding crisis. And there may be a parallel universe where Jeff Bezos and the 11 or 10 other billionaires in our state, and how many, 5,000 millionaires, 20,000 millionaires, 100,000, whatever, where they all of a sudden come together and they say, we've been thinking about it. You know, we have this all wrong. And here's a cajillion dollars to fix everything that's going, but we know that's a parallel universe. And so I just want to leave you with this. This is going to be up to us. No one's coming in to save the day. This is going to be up to us. And when I say us, I'm not just talking about the people in this room. It's the people that you talk to say, hey, I went to a thing. You want to come to the next thing with me? You want to get fill up a car and go down to Olympia? You know, and I'm not of the belief that this is going to be solved in this legislative session. We heard from our brother in Massachusetts. That was a 10-year fight in Massachusetts, but it has to start somewhere. And you know, I'll think back, and I'll end with this. In 2015, educators in Washington in the spring of 2015 walked out for one day in 67 different school districts across the state, called one-day rolling walkouts. The decision was made to not just have, you know, we hear about, oh, let's do a statewide strike all the time. And yeah, that gets some attention, but it's flash and fade. And it goes away. And then it's back to normal. The thought at the time was, what if we could keep this issue in the news for an extended period of time? And it wasn't just, you know, a march in Seattle and a rally there, but it was also in Wenatchee and Pasco and Spokane and Bellingham and Vancouver. And you know, I bring this up, there's some signs back here that look awfully familiar to me. Those are, I don't know if those are artifacts now. They have some new writing on them. But in 2015, you know, I stood on the steps of the Capitol Olympia with
4 or 5,000 other educators holding one of these signs. There's probably some people in this room who were with me and know what I'm talking about. And that led into taking some action. And I'm proud that as a local union president in a very small local, 132 members in North Snohomish County, we banded together and we're the first to say, let's take that step. I mean, I'm a WA president, by the way. We said, screw WEA. We don't care what they think. And, let's do this. What can they do to us? So I'm going to pose that question to you. What would it take? What are we willing to do? And is it time for something like that again? What can educators do? What can community members do? What can parents do? What can the students do? Because it is truly going to take all of us. The best part about this is a just fight. This is a righteous fight. And there's something to be said for being able to look yourself in the mirror each and every day and say that you are fighting on the side of right. So thank you for being here. Thank you to everyone who organized this. And as I said, the game is just beginning and we got to get in it. Have a good night, everybody.
So final words here. This is, as Larry said, a
Shout out Julianna, everybody.
There's so much work.
Thank you, Oliver. Miska, not Miska. Thank you. I do this work so that I can sleep at night. I know that I'm doing all I can. It's your turn to know that you're doing all that you can. These slides will be coming to you shortly. The screen here has a Padlet where we are inviting you. This is the interactive part. Please ask questions about the funding. The slides I'm sending you have a ton of information that we did not cover because we lifted up the voices of the people. But we're asking what questions you have about funding and what actions will you take? I'm challenging you as an educator. Answer that question now. What actions will you take? Then read the slides that we did not cover and go back in and change your answers. There is so much more that we can be doing. I thank you all for coming. If you want to please take food with you, please take I don't want to take any of that food home. So please go take food with you. Those of you that are in person. Zoom attendees, we will be sharing slides with you as we do with everyone. And let's go tax the rich.